Aloha and welcome to Created for Community. I'm Dr. Greg Townsley and I'm a researcher. I've been a veterinarian for many years and I basically lived most of my college days in the grad stacks doing research and was able to graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Zoology and then my doctorate in veterinary medicine when I was age 23. So I've kind of been a reader for a long time. I've been doing research on all kinds of things, and today I'm going to talk to you about what's happening in our country with the banking system, with the CBDCs, with the Fed, and the challenge to the US dollar now happening on a global scale by what are being called the BRICS plus nations. So buckle your seatbelt and get ready for a factual look at the push for global governance and a cashless society, which of course both of these things, if you have followed my programs on Bible prophecy, you know that both of these things are directly prophesied in the Bible, a global system, a digital global system of cashless control. And so we're going to look at what's being rolled out here in the United States and what's happening worldwide and how it's affecting everything that you're seeing in the economy right now and why inflation is really not the issue that people are having. This is how it directly affects you when you go to the store or to the gas pump, whatever. But it's really coming from the Fed and how they're driving the boat in our economy and basically what's called QE, which is quantitative easing, which is nothing more than a euphemism and a very disastrous domestic policy that has had us on a debt-based system now for many years, many decades actually. In 1944, 1945, the end of World War II, the USA had 50% of the world gross national product. The GDP, the gross domestic product, was 50%. And so the US dollar was used as the currency of exchange. It basically became the reserve currency at the end of World War II. Other countries were basically, many of them were in debt to the to the large bankers that had been loaning them money in order to finance their war. And that's how the international bankers have acted ever since the Rothschilds got onto this whole platform hundreds of years ago and started being able to control countries by making loans to them. And then, of course, after the war was over, they would get paid back on their loans. And so then the governments were taxing the people in order to pay for their war. And the military-industrial complexes of all the countries were making big-time money on the war machine. And then the banks were making even more money. And they made more money because they were funding both sides of the war. How's that for hedging your investments? And that's what they've been doing ever since. So when you wonder internationally, why is it that it's just one war after another? And if you have taken history when you were in high school or college, whatever, if you've taken US history or especially world history, it's just one war after another, after another, after another. And you have to memorize the names of the generals and the countries and the battles and, you know, I mean, you just get to the point where you just go, yuck, gross. And that's exactly what it is. You have this system that basically is corrupt. And right now, when the United States is really at a very weak point, because we are. Things have been handled very poorly in our economy. In the last 2.5 years, we've gone through We've gone from a national debt of right around $20 trillion to almost $32 trillion. So $12 trillion in 2.5 years, that's more than in the previous 50 years. I mean, that's how much occurred over the previous 50 years, and it happened in 2.5 years. There was one day, I think it was the spring of 2021, when under this current administration, they printed $3 trillion in one day and infused that into the economy. It's like throwing up confetti, saying, see, everything's just fine. Nothing to look at here. We're doing fine. The pandemic really didn't affect us very much. We'll send you a check in the mail. You can become a serf, not on a surfboard, but an SER serf, in a feudal system in which you are being taken into a system where you have to rely on the government more and more for everything. And big government is, Big Brother is going to take care of you. No, they're going to take care of you all right. Let me tell you what they're up to. Right now, you might be aware that the BRICS nations, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have banded together to form their own economic alliance. And now there are many other nations that are joining them. So it's not even called BRICS anymore, it's BRICS Plus. And more than 24 nations have now aligned against the US dollar as BRICS looks to launch a new global currency. So here's just one article. This is in the Daily Huddle. This is a total of 24 nations are now looking to build a strategic alliance that will challenge the US dollar's decades-long role as the world's reserve currency. This is just one article. So now what happened, just a little bit of history, is that after World War II, when the US was the only country that was basically solvent to any great degree, it went forth, the US dollar was used through the Bank of International Settlements, which is the international bank for all international banks. So every country has its own federal bank, like the Bank of England and the European Union Bank, the EU Bank, and the Fed here. And a lot of you don't realize that the Fed is no more a part of our federal government than FedEx is. It's just got the name, the Fed. Okay, the Federal Reserve Bank is a private bank. It has oversight from our Congress to some degree, but it is a private institution. And they set the, basically, they set things up so that banks stay solvent and bankers stay wealthy, when you come right down to it. And they got together, and this is the Rockefellers et al., 17 different families, I believe, that were the big bankers, got together on Jekyll Island. It's just, kind of prophetic, isn't it? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Oh my gosh. So anyway, Jekyll Island is where they came up with the agreement to form the Federal Reserve Bank. And I believe that was 1917. Anyway, the US dollar has been the financial currency for the world and for interactions between different countries ever since. And now that's being challenged. So what happened is the Bretton Woods Agreement happened back in the 60s. The US dollar was officially the reserve currency. But then as of around 1970, the US was defaulting on currency to foreign nations because the foreign nations would bring back the dollar bills, $100 bills, and want to cash them in for gold. And that's when Nixon stopped the gold standard. He took us off the gold standard, which basically gave the United States this supreme ability, really an unfair advantage internationally, because we could just print more money and we didn't have to back it with gold. And so we've been on this debt-based system ever since we went off the gold standard. And, you know, there are many people, many people who are experts, who are, you know, basically global economic experts. That's all they do is study economics. And the ones who are not allied with either a government or with a corporation or where they have some sort of financing from some private source. So in other words, where they're not compromised, they're all coming up and saying the same thing, is that there appears to be a plan to collapse the US economy and remove the dollar as the world reserve currency. And so what we're seeing here, for instance, here's another article, Challenging the Dominance of the US Dollar, the growing global desire to challenge the US dollar's dominance. And now their big meeting is coming here in August, at the end of August. And it looks like they are going to be coming with an announcement that they are putting forth their own gold-backed currency to challenge the US dollar as a payment, instrument of payment between countries. So in addition to the 5 core BRICS nations, again, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. You also have now a lot of other members coming in, Bangladesh, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Uruguay, and there's other countries that are wanting to join. Argentina, Iran, Algeria have formally applied to join the extended BRICS Plus group. And the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov confirmed that Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Indonesia, Argentina Mexico and several African countries have also shown interest in joining the growing network. This would allow them to interact without involving the US dollar in international trade. And so what kind of effect does this have on you and your family? That's where I'm headed with this discussion. How is this going to affect you? How is this going to affect the US dollar? What kind of steps should you take to ensure the safety, the financial safety of your family? So BRICS is aiming for financial independence, and the use of local currencies will help BRICS countries to avoid foreign exchange risks and financial shortages. Now, a lot of this came about because of policies of the current administration in Washington, who put such strong sanctions on Russia that Russia could hardly breathe. I mean, they locked down everything that Russia was doing. So we put sanctions. We used sanctions using the US dollar. We literally froze their assets. They had invested in the United States, in US bonds and T-bills and so forth and so on. And we literally froze their assets. So that's another country investing in our country and then us grabbing their assets. It's no wonder that they want to form their own group and that they don't want to be under that kind of control from the United States anymore. Sanctions have always been very effective in various different situations. And I would say that the overuse of sanctions has been a big problem here in pushing this forward. So this whole process is being called de-dollarization. I'll just show you some more articles. BRICS countries buying large amounts of gold to topple the US dollar. And all of this information is available on the internet. You can go and just put in BRICS, B-R-I-C-S. BRICS countries are buying massive amounts of gold to topple the dominance of the US dollar on the global stage. The developing nations want to rely less on the US dollar by creating a new currency to settle international trade, according to the latest report from the US global investors. BRICS nations have increased their gold buying expenditure in 2023. Not just in 2023. They have been buying gold in vast amounts for a long time, especially Russia, India, and China. So again, BRICS trying to topple US dollar with gold. Okay. So the sanctions that we put on Russia were actually not effective because what it's done is that it's pushed them into forming an international agreement, and it has also it put them in a place where they had already, over the last several decades, they had purchased so much gold that the ruble was not affected by the sanctions that we put on Russia. So their economy actually did not have the kind of hit. Of course, it did have consequences, and a lot of those consequences were to oligarchs and so forth, which I have no problem with whatsoever. I think it's great that their luxury yachts got seized and all of that stuff. I think it's great. But listen to this. The alliance of BRICS nations needs gold to back their native currency and shift away from the dollar. The USD has served as the global reserve for nearly a century, and its position is being challenged in 2023. The CEO of U.S. Global Investors, Frank Holmes, said that the pattern of BRICS nations buying gold is worrisome. If you look back at the list of net buyers of gold, you'll notice that 3 are members of the BRICS countries: Russia, India, and China. I point this out because I've been sharing with you for a couple of weeks now, we may be seeing the emergence of a multipolar world with a US-centric world on one side and a China-centric world on the other. No doubt about that at all. And so, as I said, now you've got all these other nations, more than 24 nations altogether. I believe there's 32 now that are actually actively coming against the US currency, okay? And what's that going to do to you and your family with these nations doing this and the US dollar not being the reserve currency? How will that affect you directly? It's going to. It's going to affect the United States very directly. So, world's largest regional organization to switch to settlements in national currencies. A China-led regional organization that covers more than half of Eurasia intends to transition to settlements in the currencies of its current members. While the plan is to abandon the US dollar in mutual payments, participating nations are yet to consider a common currency. So this was the meeting of the Council of Heads of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization member states. This is the largest financial organization in Asia, and it covers a vast amount of land, and China and India, and you're looking at all of these different Far Eastern European, Eurasian, and Southeast Asian countries being a part of this. So this is a very, very big development. And here's a catastrophic collapse in American standard of living, incoming as global de-dollarization takes hold. Economist Peter St. Ong. So in this article, The Economist says a stunning collapse is already well underway, with the dollar's share of global reserves falling from 73% in 2001 to 47% in 2021. St. Onge says that American sanctions are now fueling the flame, citing the fact that the U.S. froze $300 billion in Russian central bank dollars after the country instigated war with Ukraine. He believes a global realization of the sanctions risk is leading nations to further move away from the dollar and towards alternative stores of value such as gold and the euro. See, a big part of this happened because they lost the confidence in the United States to actually back them up. And this happened in August of 2021 when the current administration under Joe Biden threw Afghanistan under the bus. As we were leaving, and we had people there who had been our allies, people who had worked with us. There were 13 service members and a bunch of service dogs that died as a result of that debacle of rapidly pulling out, leaving $8 billion of modern warfare armaments in the hands of the Taliban, this hated group that that will beat women and kill women if they're not completely covered from head to toe. And this is what our country did. This is the effect of it is the next day, the very next day, Saudi Arabia started looking to China and to Russia to be able to sell oil in currencies other than the US dollar, bypassing the system that's been in place for many, many years. So this is what's happening. And now at the same time that this is happening, the Bank of International Settlements is rapidly forcing all of the different member nations that go through the Bank of International Settlements to go towards a central bank digital currency. So I'm going to talk with you about that as well and give you some information on all of that. So we have some major shifts coming geopolitically in the world right now, as you may have noticed, hopefully you've noticed. And you cannot believe what the mainstream media is telling you as far as, who's who and what's what. You have to do a little bit of research and reading and find out that there are reasons that these countries are doing this. And the reason is because they don't feel that they can trust the United States anymore. They feel that we are weak and that we don't keep our treaties and that we don't cover our friends. They watched what happened with Afghanistan. And immediately they started talking about doing an end run around the petrodollar to be able to use the Chinese yuan as currency instead of the US dollar. So, the policies that are put in place by politicians who have never, ever even done business. We are allowing our country to be run by career politicians who have never run a business, never made a real income. And we're allowing them to represent us internationally. And this is the result. Our current president knows nothing about finance other than how to do influence peddling and fill his pockets and his son's pockets from China and Ukraine and probably lots of other places. And even though that's proven, it's on tape, he bragged about it, no one's holding him accountable because our agencies are so corrupted. That's what's happening. So how far does this go back? I mean, is there actually an international plan to collapse the USA? Is there a plan to collapse the US economy? Well, here's an article from back in 1971. That's when we went off the gold standard. The Group of 10 in Rome, Group of 10. If you follow Bible prophecy and my teaching on Bible prophecy, you'll see the significance in this. Come watch my shows on Bible prophecy. If you think this is interesting, everything is falling into place. Every single detail. I've studied it for 40 years. I've looked at it in the original languages, in the Hebrew and the Greek. Looked up the individual words for the definitions, not just the translation, but the definition of the term from the original language. And I can tell you that every single thing is falling into place. Anyway, this Group of 10 in Rome begins negotiating realignment of currencies. That's 1971. United States and 9 other major non-communist countries had started negotiating a realignment of currencies for the first time since the world monetary crisis broke out last August. He declined to say specifically whether devaluation of the dollar figured in the realignment talks, but since other nations have demanded that the dollar's international value be cut as a condition for upward adjustment of their own currencies. So you see there's been this positioning for a long time, and now what it's leading to it is leading to the nations of the world that are fed up with the U.S. not keeping its word and not backing its currency properly. They're going to get their own currency. And this is going to devalue the dollar to the point where by a year from now, your $100 bill will be worth $50. It'll have the purchasing power of $50. It's going to devalue that quickly and that much. And that's our current administration. Wake up, people. Wake up. There is corruption, deep, deep corruption going on in our country. Deep corruption involving multiple agencies. It's bad. It's really bad. And this is what's happening as a result. So it's not just that the prices are going up at the pump. It's not that, Auntie Julie down the street who, has eggs from her chickens that she just suddenly wanted to sell them for twice the price. No, it's not the deal at all. It's not that the oil producers suddenly raised their prices. No, it's not a matter of inflation in that way. It's a matter of quantitative easing. And that is, as I started to tell you, the printing of money in order to make it look like everything's okay. So this is politicians kicking the can down the road, not taking responsibility, not really coming up with a balanced budget, and then just printing more money to make it look like everything's okay. And so now chickens are coming home to roost. That's what's happening. And we have the BRICS nations with the de-dollarizations. It's an active attack on the U.S. dollar. It's really a failure of U.S. And Western foreign policy. It's a huge miscalculation on these onerous Russian sanctions that have been done by our current administration. And so you have Russia and China who are meeting over to make an alliance and a gold-backed currency. So the BRICS nations are meeting, and it's happening this August, this next month, at the end of the month. I believe it's the 22nd or 22nd to 24th of August. They have their big meeting. They're going to announce that they're coming out with their own currency, a gold-backed currency. And it's going to devalue the U.S. dollar even more. So you have all kinds of other issues that are involved here, and I won't go into all of them, but I will tell you that there is a big push forward towards an international currency. And the International Money Fund, IMF, already actually has a world currency. It's called an SDR. It's a special drawing right. SDR is what it's called. It's a payment currency, and it lacks the scalability, really, of having a sovereign bond market, because really, as a reserve currency, basically what happens is that because of trade surpluses, it ends up being like a savings account for these countries, and it's not really in dollars or in SDRs, it's in securities. So it's in bonds. But the thing is that we've just demonstrated that we will actually take over whatever investments they have that they're holding and will nullify it. That's what the current administration just did. They just showed the world that the world cannot trust the United States as a safe place to do business. That's what our current administration just did. In the last 2 years, we have shown the world that we cannot be trusted. Afghanistan was just the start of that. Printing trillions of dollars to try to make, that are not gold-backed. And now the world's saying, hey, forget it. We can't trust you guys. So we have an acceleration of the timetable for what's called the Great Reset. This is the World Economic Forum and the globalists out of Davos. And in unification with the United Nations and with the WHO, who are all putting in plans for a digitalized, cashless economy that will be programmable and totally controllable. So this is what's happening right now. Maybe some of you know that they just rolled out the FedNow program. The FedNow program is here in the United States, and it is a payment platform that allows for instant settlement of accounts. So in other words, like with PayPal or with Venmo, there is a transaction that takes place, and there's a period of time from which it translates from one person's account into another person's account. You know that with checks, you know that with money transfers, for instance. But with this new system that's digitalized, and I'm not sure whether it's running on the blockchain or this other method, but now what has happened just in the last few months is we've gone off the SWIFT system, which is how international transactions took place, the SWIFT system, and you'd have a SWIFT number and so forth for international transactions, and it went through the Bank of International Settlements. Now it's all going to a digitalized form. I think it's called IO, I don't know whether it's iOS, but it's IO like 20022 or something. But anyway, this digitalized platform. And now we have the FedNow program, which is our own country's digital platform for transactions to take place. And the advantage is it happens right away, so it's very convenient. It's 24/7. There's no shutdown on the weekend. There's no shutdown for holidays, et cetera, et cetera. But it is the tracks that are being laid for the central bank digital currency, the CBDC, which is not like cryptocurrency. It's a digital currency, but it's not like cryptocurrency, which is decentralized. So the decentralized platforms, you have anonymity, you have privacy. People don't know your transactions. And the CBDC that they're coming out with for the Fed, the federal banks, and so forth, will be centralized in power and control, and they're programmable. That means that they can have an expiration date on the money that you have in your account. For instance, you could have $500 in your account, but it's only good through Christmas, and you have to spend it by then, or else it just expires. So they can put expiration dates on programmable currency, programmable digital currency that's centralized and completely controlled by the Fed. Another thing that means is that you could have $1,000 in your bank account, and tomorrow morning you could only have $700, and all they'd have to do is manipulate the interest rates and go to negative interest rates. And immediately, you would go from $1,000 to $700 overnight, and you'd have no ability to change that. You'd have no ability to have any comeback against that. That's what they want to roll out here in the United States. Central bank digital currencies through the Fed, which is a private bank. It is not it's not part of our federal government. The Federal Reserve Bank is no more part of our federal government than FedEx is. The only thing is that it's regulated to some degree by Congress. They could, not only that, but with programmable currency, they could limit what you buy. For instance, they've already talked about this on the international level with the Green Movement, is that they're going to control how much beef you can buy, for instance. So you go up to the register and you have your steaks with you. You go to Costco, you go walking out with your ribeyes, and you lay them there on the counter, and they come up and they go, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't purchase these." "What do you mean I can't purchase these? There's lots of money in my bank." "Oh, it's not a matter of you not having the money. You've already reached your limit for the month." And all of that digitalized, AI-controlled, AI-tracked, so they can actually know how many steaks you've bought for the number of people in your house. I'm not kidding. This is what they're doing. This is what they want to do. You better push back now. A central bank digital currency is not a good idea. And when you read Revelation chapter 13 in the Bible, you know where it's headed, and you don't want to go there. If they ever want to give you a digital ID and they want to put it under the skin of your right hand or on your forehead, whatever you do, do not take it. That is the highway to hell. That is a ticket to eternal damnation. Never take any kind of mark, any kind of chip, any kind of ID, whether it's on the skin, in the skin, under the skin, it doesn't matter. Because the term in the original Greek can be either on or in, to the skin. Don't take it. That's down the road somewhere. I hope you won't be here for that. I won't be. I'll be airlifted in the great disappearance that the Bible calls the rapture. And I hope that you'll go too, because God loves you. And he doesn't want you to suffer. He doesn't want you to go through what's coming. This beast system that is being put together is the most horrific thing that the world has ever seen. And it all sounds very altruistic in how they're rolling it out. What they plan to do for us. The politicians who care so much about us. Really? You buy that? Who did kill JFK? How did Building 7 come down? Come on, folks. Do some thinking. There are things happening. There are things happening in our country. There's so much corruption. There's so many paid-off politicians. The military-industrial complex and Big Pharma own many of our politicians on both sides of the aisle. This is not a Democrat-Republican thing, but you've got paid-off politicians. And now they're being controlled by the World Economic Forum, who's driving forth this whole agenda for a worldwide cashless society. So these CBDC, centralized power, programmable currency, and these are digital dollars that can be manipulated by the Federal Reserve Bank and by the government. The Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, which is the central bank for all the central banks of the world, go through the BIS. That's how settlements happen and go out in different directions. They've already publicly stated that CBDCs are mandated and will be centralized and programmable, and all of the G7 countries, the biggest economies of the world, signed on to that already. You had no say in it, nobody told you about it, and it was already signed. They've already agreed to it. But we still have the ability to push back. We still have a say for a short period of time. We're looking at foreign control by unelected officials, whether it's the WHO system that's part of the International Pandemic Accord, which they're calling the EARS system, which is in Article 18 of the Instrument on International Pandemic Prevention, that is being rolled out to world leaders this next November, and they expect to have it signed next spring, which will give them the ability to use computerization and AI to track all public discourse, all conversations. Whether it's your emails, no matter what it is, they will be able to actually, quote, identify any information voids. In other words, whatever they label misinformation or disinformation, they are aiming at being able to have control over that. Not only to identify it, but then to weaponize it by involving the NSA, the FBI, and the CIA. That's part of programs that were put forth in 2020 and 2021 by the Bloomberg Center for Health Security during the pandemic. The pandemic was used in order to gain further levels of global control using fear and propaganda. And over 900, well, it's almost 1 million now signatures on the Great Barrington Declaration, which was by many, many epidemiologists, board-certified doctors, research scientists, virologists, vaccinologists, microbiologists, who all said that the pandemic was being handled exactly wrong. And of course, we know that it was handled in lockstep fashion from Event 201, which was the pandemic planning event that took place in the fall of 2019, 5 months before the pandemic. Event 201, look it up, ID 2020. The whole purpose was to use vaccines in order to push forward for an international ID that would be digital. And that's what they're doing. So the Bank of International Settlements has put a time frame on this. We're looking at our own country's government, giving control over to foreign interests being run by unelected officials who will be able to measure your carbon footprint. You know, the problem really, it's not all the pollution coming from China. It's those cow farts. I mean, we know that cows, you know, they eructate, they belch, they pass gas. And that's what's hurting our environment. No, it's not the chemtrails, it's not the atmospheric geoengineering and the spraying of aluminum particles and calcium carbonate into our stratosphere in order to try to reflect the sun back off the earth so that the earth isn't so hot. We've had many, many episodes in history in which the temperature of the earth went up and went down and went up and went down. They are changing the stratosphere, and it's affecting our weather, and it's causing weather crisis. And then they're going to use the weather crisis to declare a health emergency in order to further their globalist goals to shut us down, destroy the middle class, and take over. And that's what they're doing. So they want to measure your carbon footprint. They want to know if you're in line with the SDGs. This will be the new religion, the Sustainable Development Goals. And the ESG, the Environmental Social Governance Goals of the United Nations, Agenda 2030. And this is all being put out into different governments through the young global leaders of the World Economic Forum, who for the last 50 years have been placing their own officials in governments all across the world. Canada is up in arms because of Trudeau and what he's doing to that country. For instance, how he shut down the truckers that were doing a peaceful protest over ridiculous restrictions. So I'll explain to you what happened, just real briefly, because I know, because I used to live in the suburbs outside of Detroit. I grew up there. We had a cabin over in Canada. I used to go across the Ambassador Bridge all the time, at least once a week in the summer, because we would be at our cottage and I'd have to come back over and cut the grass at our house in the suburbs outside of Detroit. And what was happening with these truckers is that during the pandemic, they would be tested, they would be negative, they would be vaccinated, but then they were being forced to take another test before they came back across the Ambassador Bridge back into Canada. Well, these guys, they drive over, the guys and gals drive these 18-wheelers over. They pull up to a loading dock. You know, the forklifts come out. They unload the stuff. Everything's digital. They don't even have a piece of paper they pass back and forth. It's all on a pad. They don't touch anybody's hands. They don't have direct contact with anybody other than they talk out their window to somebody who's standing more than 6 feet away. And they do business, and they turn their 18-wheeler around, and they come back across the Ambassador Bridge or through the tunnel. And Canada, Trudeau in Canada, was forcing them to take another test before they came back across the bridge, even though they had been vaccinated before they went across, and they were more than double vaccinated. So the truckers just said, this is draconian control. We won't go with this tyranny. And they had a peaceful protest, which then, you know, any of the elements of the World Economic Forum influenced media was immediately trying to make the truckers sound like they were doing something bad. They were standing against tyranny, and they were doing it peacefully. And the country was behind them. And then Trudeau actually froze their bank accounts and the bank accounts of anyone who supported them. That's what this government wants to be able to do with central bank digital currencies. They want to be able to shut you down, turn you off, and control you, and even measure how much beef you eat and whether you buy ammo or not. They want to have total control through central bank digital currencies, and that's what we're looking at. And if you don't push back now, and you don't talk about it, and you don't tell your friends, and if there isn't some sort of big, huge pushback in America, America's the only one standing in the way. We're the only ones who still have the amount of freedom to do something. If you've watched, you know, it hardly gets reported here. Huge demonstrations in France. Huge demonstrations. I'm not talking about the ones by the Islamists, the terrorists who've been burning houses, buildings, police stations. I'm not talking about the ones burning down museums. I'm talking about the ones who were protesting because their retirement was being taken away from them, and they were changing the age of retirement and changing even the money that they would get after they'd paid into the system through their whole life. And suddenly Macron, who is a WEF, young global leaders superstar, controlled by Klaus Schwab and Yuval Noah Harari of the World Economic Forum. And you have the same thing down in New Zealand, and you have the same thing in Australia. And if you want that here in America, then just don't do anything, because it's coming. But if you push back now, you get a hold of your representatives and you do something about it, you start talking this up among people, then we've got a chance to at least slow this down. They want to use AI scanning to eliminate disinformation, eliminate dissenters. They want carbon taxes, censorship, and complete control over your finances. So that is what the central bank digital currencies are really all about. That is what the FedNow program is laying the tracks for. That's already in place now. That ability is being used currently between banks, and now it will be implemented more and more over the next year. There's this huge discussion that's going to happen in August, in which the BRICS nations are going to switch away from the US dollar, and that's because of our terrible track record of not being trustworthy internationally, and because of our current administration throwing Afghanistan under the bus, and the rest of the world watched and said, oh my gosh, we can't trust them to protect us, even if we are their allies. And now we're trying to the current administration is over making up for that with what is happening in Ukraine. We can't get it back. We already lost it. They're already coming out with their own gold-backed currency. It'll be announced at the end of August. Get ready, because you better do something to safeguard your finances. Your US dollars, your $100 bill will be worth $50 next year. What can you do? Well, you can invest in gold and silver. Probably silver is even better. It's less expensive, and it usually jumps to a higher degree than gold does once everybody realizes what's happening and they start realizing that their dollars are going down. Whatever you do, do not buy depreciating assets. It's not the time to buy a new car. I know that there's all this money that's been thrown up in the air like confetti to make it look like everything's just fine. And that's what they're telling you. The Fed is telling you all. Remember they were saying 2 years ago, it's transitory, it's just temporary. No, we're not really going into a recession. No. All of this terrible inflation it's really lower than you think, when in fact it was much higher. And if you run the real numbers, inflation's already been between 13 and 15% for many, many items, and some items even more than that. The government is lying to you. The news media is lying to you. The corruption and collusion that exists in our country right now will end up being judged if there's not some sort of repentance. America is going to go down if we don't do something as Americans. This is Dr. Greg Townsley coming to you with a message in my series called Created for Community. I care about you. I care about your Ohana. I care about our beautiful island. I care about our beautiful country. My heart is breaking. My heart is breaking for all this. And I just encourage you, do the research. Check into what I'm telling you. Don't even take it directly from my mouth. But I guarantee you all of this is standard source material. And I don't bring anything to you that's not proven fact. Check it out. Do some research. Take some measures to protect your family. Probably in the short term, you're going to see some things go up and down real fast. Some people are saying that, AI-driven investments in cryptocurrency is because it makes money going up or going down is a way to go. I don't know that much about that. I do know that silver is a safe investment. So do something with your savings and don't buy anything that you can't afford. And it's time to tighten the belt. Be wise. Take care of your ohana. Don't waste your money. Tough times are coming. Tough times are coming. Sorry to say. But I just want you to know so that you can, do some things. Do some things. Do some things for your kids. Do some things for your family. Come together, as community with groups, have some, you can get together with potlucks and stuff like that and eat a whole lot cheaper. I mean, there's just all kinds of things you can do. We need to pull together as community. And this series is called Created for Community, because I truly believe that we were created to live in beneficial relationships that support one another, encourage one another, and bless one another. I believe that is how God designed us, and that it's selfishness and ego and greed that destroys everything. Pride. So I'm praying for our island. I'm praying for the families of this island, and I'm praying for America. I hope you will too. God bless. Bye-bye.